So this is part 4 of the Paranjan history video series. Now, I was in India when we left off on part 3, and it was getting increasingly difficult for me to do anything in India because my health was deteriorating rather badly. I had all kinds of illnesses. I had dysentery and jaundice and all kinds of, let's say, food poisoning type symptoms, because it's very difficult to find clean food and clean water in India. One time we were at a feast and some man was serving out big plates to us, and Prabhupada just put his hands down and whispered to the devotee next to him, and the message we got, which circulated around by whispers, was, "Do not eat this food, it is poison." So Prabhupada was very skeptical of the food in India. Anyway, I decided I would have to go back to the West. Now, one of the last things that happened to me was that I got scabies. Scabies is a little mite that burrows under your skin and kind of drives you crazy because it just makes you scratch and itch all day long, and the scratching and itching can even turn into bleeding sores eventually. So I was plagued with this problem, and I tried all kinds of Ayurvedic medicine, Western medicine, and nothing seemed to help. So I became very desperate, and I bought a plastic container to the gas station. I bought a gallon of gas, and I went up on a rooftop and I poured a gallon of gas all over myself and covered literally every square inch of my body with gasoline. Then I just sat in the sun for the rest of the day, and remarkably enough, that was the first night I was able to sleep well for a long time because the scabies were gone. Now, do I recommend anybody do that? Well, no, but it just shows you how India, you can get into a very desperate situation because your health is deteriorating and the medicine they give you may or may not help. Now, one time when I had jaundice, a devotee went to complain to Prabhupada that Paranjan is taking Western medicine. Now, the Western medicine may have had some kind of pig liver oil in it, or who knows what, I don't know. But this devotee complained to Prabhupada, Paranjan's taking Western medicine, and Prabhupada just said, well, if you're sick, you have to take medicine. What's the problem? He just didn't see how this was a problem. He didn't want us to be sick, and if Western medicine would help, then he had no objection to it, and he didn't tell us to stop taking Western medications. So this has come up a lot after Prabhupada left. If a devotee gets a chronic ailment or even a fatal ailment, should that devotee take medications or not take medications? And I think it's a mistake to just think you're going to get well without medication if you are a Western person. The Western people have a Western body and they may need Western treatment. If you get very sick, I have a devotee lady friend, and she got COVID, and she would not go to the hospital, and she was literally coughing up blood, and finally we convinced her to go to the hospital. She took some kind of medication there, and within 48 hours she was much better. So I'm not saying Western medicine is a cure-all or a wonderful thing, but I am saying devotees should be careful that if they think they're going to survive without medication, if they have some kind of a fatal ailment, they may end up suffering unnecessarily. That's the point I'm making. We shouldn't suffer unnecessarily. If something helps, if it's gasoline or something else, well, just you may have to use that, but you must maintain your health if you can somehow or other. Of course, we all know there's only so much you can do to maintain your health, and if there's some destiny for you to die, you will die, and that's also a fact. But anyway, before I get into me traveling back to the West, I wanted to mention something that I am discussing with a devotee right now. And this devotee was a big fan of Gaur Govinda Maharaj. Gaur Govinda was a Indian sannyasi and a swami. He was also a member of the GBC's Guru program. He was voted into the GBC Guru program. And This devotee was making a big joke out of the fact that Govinda's temple was not too far from Puri, and they would visit Puri, and the Western devotees would try all kinds of different tricks, dressing up in disguises and things like that to try to get into the Jagannath Puri temple because the Western devotees were not allowed in the temple. So I made a point to this devotee. First of all, he thought this was all very silly and funny and hysterically a joke. And I said, well, wait a minute. Govinda supported the GBC Guru program. The GBC Guru program has essentially driven out Western people, and the Western people are not seeing Lord Jagannath right now. So why is this a funny joke? You know, Govinda's program did what the pandas or the pujaris or the brahmins of the Puri temple wanted, which is to have the Western devotees not seeing Lord Jagannath. And this has happened on a very wide scale all over ISKCON in the West. In the West, the temples are very much empty of Western devotees. I have a friend in Australia. He went to a big program at a big temple there, and he sent me a picture. Him and his wife were the only Western people at this festival. There was like 300 Hindus and no Western people. So the idea that we can recreate what's going on in Puri, and this is going to please Prabhupada, is false. Prabhupada wanted the Western people to be seeing Lord Jagannath every day, all the time. He did not want this to become an exclusive Hindu club like it is already in Puri and has been that way for centuries. He wanted to break the mold and bring Lord Jagannath to the Western people. And that is clearly not happening under the current ISKCON administration. Now, this story has a very tragic end for many, many Western devotees who were deprived of seeing Lord Jagannath. And I will give you one example. I had a devotee lady friend. Her name was Tribhuvaneshwari, and she had a daughter, and her daughter and my daughter were play friends. They would get together. Anyway, one day I'm over at Tribhu's house, and she calls me into her kitchen, and she's obviously very distressed. She's got a very stressful look about her, and she sits me down at her kitchen table, and she says, Pranjan, I hate to tell anyone this, but I have lost my will to live. I no longer want to be alive because I can no longer see my deities. So she was a pujari in the Berkeley Temple, and she was kicked out by Hansaduda's gang. Of course, Hansaduda kicked out almost all the Western devotees, so she was just one of the victims of that process. But it took a big toll on this lady, and she was suffering very, very badly. So she said, I have lost my will to live. And unfortunately, there wasn't much comfort I could give her. I understood the situation. She was very despondent and very depressed because these Gunda criminals had taken over the temple and kicked people like her out of her service to the deity. Now fast forward 1 year later, just 1 year from that time, and me and my wife Ishwari went to visit her in the hospital where she was suffering from stage 4 cancer, and she only had a very short time left to be on this planet. According to the nurses told us she is on her way out. So if we wanted to say goodbye, we should say goodbye now. That's what the nurses said. So we had a little kirtan there, and she was in a coma type state. She was just knocked out on medications of who knows what. So we just gave her a kirtan anyway, and just hoped it would penetrate into her thinking somehow or other. But anyway, finally we had to leave. The nurses told us it's visiting hours over, we gotta go. So I get up and I walk over to her bed and I put my hand on her forehead and I said, "Goodbye, Tribu." And all of a sudden her eyes opened really big and she broke out in a huge smile and she says, "Oh, Paranjan, you're here." I says, "Yeah, it's me, Haribo." And then she just kept staring into my eyes. And we were communicating, I believe, on the mind platform, the transference of thoughts platform. And basically she was telling me, I know that you know that we all know I am checking off of this planet because I cannot tolerate to be on the same planet with these bums who kicked me out of my service and would not allow me to see my deity. So she was so distraught over not being able to see Krishna, she checked out of here. Then these Gaur Govinda people are like laughing and joking. "Oh yeah, haha, we had a hard time trying to see the deity." It's some kind of hysterical joke for these people. Well, I'm sorry, but people died because of Gaur Govinda's program removing them from seeing the deity. And she's just one of many examples of devotees who suffered horrible situations because they were deprived of their service or deprived from seeing the deity and all the rest of it. Their lives were essentially ruined and destroyed, and in some cases, or a number of cases, their lives were ended. So this is not a joke. And it is very sad when I see these Gaur Govinda people going, "Oh, yuck, 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 ha, ha, ha. We couldn't go to see the deity, ha, ha." Yeah, well, you killed people. I believe they collectively killed this woman. This woman would not have died in an untimely way. I mean, this is way back in the mid-1980s. She had to check out of here because she couldn't tolerate these people. And I don't blame her at all. You know, she had to go somewhere where she could serve Krishna, and this was not the place. So anyway, it is very sad, and I don't think these people have any clue about the repercussions that they're creating for other people. We're just going to kick out all the Western people. We're going to recreate a Puri type situation, and that's what Prabhupada wanted. It is not what Prabhupada wanted. I'm sorry. Anyway, I just thought I would throw that in because this is still going on now. You know, the repercussions for these actions that people took in changing the deity worship and removing people who were doing the deity worship had far-reaching, long-lasting, lifetime effects and life-ending effects for other people. And I believe all the people responsible for that will be held accountable. And just like Prabhupada says, if you kill a cow, you have to spend so many years in hell for each hair on the cow's body. Well, what happens if you get rid of a devotee, a great devotee like Tribhuv, and you mess up her life and you end her life? Well, you know, she is a billion, trillion times more important to Krishna than a cow. And you ended her life. And now you're laughing and joking about it, which means your sentence, when you get your sentence from Yamaraj, is going to be worse because you don't even have remorse. You don't even understand. You're standing on a pile of skulls. Your program is harming and killing Vaishnavas. So when I say changing the deity worship has many profound malefic implications, this is just one more example. It should not have been changed. None of these changes were authorized, and if these changes had not been made, Tribu would have continued being the pujari there, and nothing would have happened to her, and the temple would be full of Western people coming to see Lord Jagannath instead of driving all the Western people out. So I don't want to belabor this point too much, but it just seems like so many devotees just have no clue what is going on here and how these changes are impacting ISKCON and impacting individual people. Anyway, let's get started on moving me to England from India. So I meet this guy who has a sign on his Volkswagen bus, "Ride to London." And I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to get this guy to take me to London. So I get in this Volkswagen bus, and we're going to drive overland, which means going through Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, all these places. And we're going to go to England. Now, it turns out this guy was a bus driver. He had a big bus, and his bus went over the side of a mountain and crashed. So he lost his bus, because at the time there was a regular bus service going back and forth from London to Delhi, overland. So he was one of the drivers, and so he just bought this Volkswagen in India to get himself back to England. So anyway, I'm riding with this guy, and it's just pretty amazing stuff going on. We're going through the customs at all these different countries, but he already knows the ropes because he does this all the time. But the people who don't know the ropes get all their luggage gone through, and they take out a whole bunch of valuable stuff and then send you on your way. So it's a very dicey thing to travel in these countries. We went through Pakistan. We went through some pretty rough areas where all kinds of people were carrying guns and things like that. So it was quite an amazing adventure, really. And it was very hard for me as a vegetarian to find anything I could eat in a lot of these places. It was just like, do you want to have some goat milk cheese? That's all we got. So it was like that. But one thing I noticed, we went through Iraq, and it was the only country where there was any Western music on the radio. And the bus driver told me that in Iraq, they love America, they love American culture, and the leaders there are secular, and they're not into the, let's say, Muslim culture of many of the other countries in that area. So he thought this was a very progressive place, and we should be very careful to make sure the government of Iraq stays as it is. And of course, that didn't happen. We got rid of the government of Iraq, and it turned it into a theocracy kind of state. And that was a big mistake, in my opinion, because the people there became very suppressed without that, say, secular type government. So I'm more of a fan of secular type governments because they at least allow the Hare Krishna religion to go on in their country without a whole lot of hassle and retribution and things like that. I don't think America has learned a good lesson on this yet, because we keep seemingly causing these theocracies to flourish to our peril and to the peril of the people living in those countries. So we stopped somewhere, I think it was in Turkey, and we stopped at a cafe, and there was two swords behind the counter, and the guy behind the counter was this really grim-looking guy with a big beard, and he just pulled one of the swords off the wall and started swinging it at our bus driver, and I said, oh my God, we're dead. This is it. And then the bus driver jumped behind the counter and grabbed the other sword, and they were duking it out with swords for like 20 minutes. And I thought, oh my God, these guys are going to kill each other or something. But finally, they both put their swords down, and everybody in the cafe just started laughing, because apparently that's what they do for entertainment over there. I don't know. But the bus driver just told me, oh yeah, this happens all the time. I stop at this cafe. Don't worry about it. And I'm going, oh my God. So it's a little bit of a culture shock for me. But anyway, so we finally get to England, and the bus driver guy says, I hope you have about 1,000 pounds on you, because they won't let you in if you have no cash on you. And I says, well, I've got no cash at all. And so he gave me his wallet, and his wallet was just a big wad of cash inside of it. And he says, well, just tell them that this is your wallet. Okay. So somehow or other, Krishna arranged that, because I probably would have gotten into a lot of trouble without having cash on me at the time. So, to make a long story short, I think Krishna was looking out for me on this trip, because it was a somewhat perilous trip, and all kinds of things could have gone wrong, but he wanted me to get to England and get to the temple, which is what happened. I finally got to the temple, which was at the time 7 Bury Place in London. And the inside of the temple was kind of redone to look like a sailing ship, I think. It just had these wooden pillars all around, and it had, what looked like wood decking that you would find on a ship making up the walls. And it was quite an interesting decoration. But the temple room itself was very, very small. It was, I don't know, as big as a living room maybe. And it was just packed out with devotees. So everybody there was just glad to see me, another devotee. So I said, I'm going to be going on to America. And everybody said, oh, no, you can't be going to America. You need to stay here. We need more devotees here at this temple. So you can stay and do service here and all that stuff. So I said, okay, well, I'll give it a whirl. But, I mean, I knew I'm a Yankee in the UK. I don't have any papers, and I don't have a visa. I don't have anything. And I kind of asked the temple, what am I going to do about my visa? And they just said, oh, don't worry about it. They're never going to know who you are or ask you any questions about it. So they seem to have a pretty laissez-faire attitude about paperwork and documents and all the rest of it. So why do I even mention these types of things? Because I think it's important for people to understand the mood and attitude of the devotees that Prabhupada had at the time. They were pretty much discombobulated, let's just say. They didn't really have a lot of practical understanding of how the world is supposed to work. So they're very naive on a lot of levels, and therefore a lot of, let's say, weird things kept happening because there was no real system of checks and balances with these types of people. They couldn't really grasp the practical need of the hour to do certain things. And that is what Prabhupada had, by and large, as his crew. He had a lot of people who were, let's call them, space cadets. Space cadets who were spaced out. But somehow or other, things were going on. So that was like a miracle in itself. All these kinds of people who didn't really have a lot of practical brain were managing everything somehow or other. Now there was one American devotee named Nisringananda. Nisringananda had been busted in India. He flew into India wearing 50 Rolex watches on both arms. So he was trying to smuggle some probably fake Rolexes into India, and he was in all the newspapers in India and got into a lot of trouble there. So later he got bailed out. The temple had to bail this guy out. And Prabhupada said, all the service you have done is now undone because you're giving me a bad name. So you have to promise me that you will never conduct criminal activities ever again. The Nisringananda said, yes, I promise I will never do that. Well, 2 weeks later, he's arrested coming into England, and he was trying to smuggle marijuana into England. So, same thing. He just created another scandal there. And he went to jail, I think, for 8 years or something in England. But anyway, he kept writing to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada encouraged him. So it's just another example. This is the kind of guy Prabhupada was dealing with. Not very practical, and maybe a little bit criminal, let's just say. So anyway, he had a wife, and the wife was very discouraged by this guy, and it just caused a lot of trouble for a lot of people, this kind of guy being in ISKCON. But Prabhupada was very tolerant because there weren't many of us. I mean, people wonder, well, why did Prabhupada tolerate? Well, there was only a small crew at any location. It was just like a skeleton crew. So he was very tolerant because he was trying to build up some kind of a manpower and organization. And unfortunately, many of the people who came were not very qualified to help his organization, and a number of them caused trouble for his organization. Anyway, I got along very well with all of those devotees. There was Rohini Nandan, Bhajahari, Vichitravirya, Dhananjaya, Tribhuvanath, Ranchor, Tribhangananda, and then my future wife, Ishwari. Malati was there. A devotee named Mohan was there. Mohan was like the maintenance guy. And everyone treated me very friendly way, and I can't complain about it at all. I really enjoyed their company at the time, and they all encouraged me to stay. They all liked me. So it was really like a family mood there, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate them making me welcome, because it was important, I think, for me to be in England at that time and experience the things that I would experience there. So without them helping me stay there, it would not have worked. Anyway, later on I sorted out my visa problem by marrying Ishwari, and I got a kind of a green card type thing to stay in England at the time, and I got an English license and all the rest of it. So I was able to stay pretty much after that without any difficulty in terms of my paperwork. So a big transformation was taking place at that time because Shyam Sundar, who was the governing body commission leader in England, had made contact with George Harrison, and he had got George Harrison to agree to donate a large estate building to ISKCON. And so this was a big, important development for the movement in England at that time. And we really needed a big building at that time because Bury Place was just a tiny little building, really, and it was just packed out with devotees. So we were all looking forward to getting the manor and having everybody move out to a bigger location where we would have more space and more preaching opportunities. At the same time, I really liked the Bury Place temple. It had a real family environment there, and it was close to Oxford Street, so we could do Harinam from there. And it was a very convenient location for ISKCON to have at that time. But one thing that happened at Bury Place that really changed my situation was that some kind of court bailiffs came to the temple and were doing an inventory of everything in the temple, and they said they were going to come and confiscate all of the property inside the temple, including the deities, because Shyam Sundar had made some kind of a ruby business, and he had used the temple as collateral, and it turns out his rubies were not really worth a whole lot of money. So we were in big trouble financially, because although Shyam Sundar had a very gifted talent for making contact with important people, he also had a propensity to have very wild schemes about how he was going to become a multi-millionaire and all the rest of it. So he was unfortunately very easily made into a victim, because when he went to India, some Indian man promised him he had a ruby mine, and he got Shyam Sundar all wrapped around the axle with this ruby business, which turned out to be a scam, and it was a big problem. But anyway, we'll get into that in the future edition of our history, but I just wanted to give people a few ideas what I was encountering at that time, and I'm sorry that people keep telling me I'm harping too much on the guru's taking sins. I'm harping too much on changing the deity worship. But these are very important things. And Prabhupada said, the most dangerous thing for my movement is if we change the deity worship. So it's very dangerous if we conditioned souls take sins. It's very dangerous if we change up the deity worship. And unfortunately, what people don't seem to realize is there's a whole domino cascading down effect if you change something. And it's just like if you are flying a Boeing 747 and you put the nose down 1%, it doesn't seem like a big problem right away. But if you keep flying, 1% down, eventually you will hit the ground. So it's not noticeable that there's a big problem right away, but eventually it catches up and there's catastrophic repercussions. And that is why Prabhupada was so emphatic about warning us on these principles. So I hope this helps, and stay tuned. We will continue with this series about the adventures of me being in England. Hari Bol.